Hey, it's Dr. John Terry, the Black Belt Leader, and welcome to the Black Belt Leadership Podcast, where each week I'm giving you tips, tools, insights, and resources to help you become a better version of who you are and what you do as you discover, develop, and deploy your own Black Belt Leader within. Now, if you were a child of the 70s, the 80s, or the 90s, I can tell you the odds are pretty good that you remember Schoolhouse Rock. Now, what you may not know is the backstory. Now, Schoolhouse Rock was the brainchild of David McCall. Now, David McCall was an advertising executive who discovered, having taken his son to a camp, that his son could easily remember the song lyrics of every song the Rolling Stones ever recorded, but this same son couldn't memorize his multiplication tables. He came up with this brilliant idea to go to a friend and have him compose a pithy, rocky style song that could teach math principles that his son could learn. This ultimately led to the creation of Three is a Magic Number. And that video became the foundation for the series Schoolhouse Rock. Now, you may also know the name Michael Eisner from Disney fame, but during this period of time, Michael Eisner was an ABC program executive. He saw the potential in this one film, Three is a Magic Number, and he opted to develop this into a television series. Now, if we go look at Schoolhouse Rock, it initially focused, of course, on mathematics. And from there, it expanded into grammar and American history, and then science. Now, when you look at Schoolhouse Rock, what really made it popular was engaging animations, memorable music, very pithy lyrics, and great educational content. Now, this series, Schoolhouse Rock, became very popular and became a significantly influential part of Saturday morning television for over a decade. Now, this was the time in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s that most kids on Saturday morning, they were glued to the television watching cartoons. So this was an opportunity to mix something that these generation of kids were growing up enjoying, but adding an educational element to it. Now, my granddaughter is currently learning conjunctions in her English class. And she and my wife were talking the other day, and my wife, an English major and a creative writing major in college, she was explaining to our granddaughter what conjunctions were and how they work in structuring a sentence. And as they were going through this, when my daughter and my granddaughter were sitting in my wife's sewing room, I broke into a song from the 1973 Saturday morning TV show, Schoolhouse Rock. That song was Conjunction Junction. Conjunction Junction, what's your function? Hook it up words and phrases and clauses. Conjunction junction, what's your function? Hooking up cars and making them function. Those were some of the pithy, catchy lyrics of Conjunction Junction. Now, from a English and grammatical perspective, a conjunction is a word that connects words or phrases or clauses together. They're essential for building complex sentences, and they show the relationship between ideas. So conjunctions will connect ideas. They'll join words, they'll join phrases, they'll join clauses. They vary sentence structure, and they compare or contrast the relationship of words or ideas. Now, that's the definition of a conjunction, and it's pretty quite elaborate. But when we think of conjunctions, the three most common conjunctions that you and I are probably familiar with, and the three most common that we saw in the television show Conjunction Junction, are and, but, and or. And a matter of fact, I remember the conductor in Conjunction Junction saying, I've got three conjunctions, and, but, and or, and they'll get you pretty far. So and but are important conjunctions. Or is an important conjunction. I don't want to spend time today on and or, but I do want to spend a few minutes on the but. Now, by definition, and again, let's go back and set the definition because it's going to set the stage for the but effect that I want to introduce in today's teaching. By definition, but is a conjunction. Now, not only is it conjunction, it's a conjunction that is specifically what's called a coordinating conjunction. It's used to connect a word or a phrase or a clause that contrasts or shows a relationship of opposition. That's the official definition. What is it? The but is there to indicate there's a difference or to present an opposite thought or an opposite idea. So the primary purpose of the word but is to introduce a contracting idea or a piece of information that's unexpected given what was already said. In fact, a but contrasts action, qualities, or preferences. So if we think about it, the but separates thoughts or ideas. But in reality, what is the but? It's a limiter, it's a restrictor, it's a withholder, it's a stifler, it's an excuse maker, it's a compromiser, or it's an eliminator. But is a self imposed roadblock that you and I use often without consciously thinking about it that restricts our progress and limits our success. Now, when we talk about black belt leaders, and I do that often, understand this: black belt leaders are committed to daily personal growth. I talk about that in my book, Black Belt Leadership 101. I talk about that in my book, Black Belt Secrets of Success. And many of the other books I've written stress the importance of daily personal growth. Now, daily personal growth is a journey of positive progression where you and I have an opportunity to learn, to grow, to improve, and to enhance or expand the quality of our thinking. Black belt leaders understand that progress signifies positive movement as we strive each day to become a better version of ourselves than we were the day before. Being a black belt leader is about working toward our goals. It's about developing new skills. It's about honing the skills we already have and mastering those skills. And it's about gaining a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us. So, progress to a black belt leader is nothing more than a continuous journey of self discovery and personal and professional improvement. This progress is characterized by three things: learning, evolving, and striving for black belt excellence, not just in our personal lives, but in every area of our personal and our professional lives. At the end of the day, it's about one thing: it's about avoiding the but effect. Now, when we were born, we experienced the but effect a lot. Now, the but I'm talking about is B-U-T-T, that bottom, that thing that we set on throughout our lives. And I mean, think about our early childhood days. As we began to learn to crawl, all of a sudden we found ourselves sitting up on what? Our butt. That's the butt effect kicking in. And then a little bit later, we began to learn to pull ourselves up. We began to learn to take our first faltering steps. And guess what? You and I, we spent a lot of time teetering, falling, and you guessed it, landing on our butt. Now, the good news for most of us is the fact that our butts were padded and it was close to the ground. So if we slipped and we fell, which we likely did a lot growing up and learning to climb and learning to stand and ultimately learning to walk and then run, we fell on our butts quite a bit. Now, it hurt a little, but guess what? It prevented us from serious harm as we were learning to do the things we now take for granted. Now, that was the BUTT effect. What I want to talk about for the next few minutes is the BUT effect, the but effect of making excuses. That's the but I want to lean into and talk about for a few minutes today. So the but effect that I'm talking about is nothing more than self-imposed limitations that you and I place on ourselves. It's a mental barrier that we erect in our way, often unconsciously, that ends up restricting our progress, limiting our potential, and preventing us from achieving our goals and experiencing success in our lives. The but effect is a narrative. It's a conversation, a story that we tell ourselves. It's something that we believe to be true, that we choose not to challenge, and it ultimately does one thing: it holds us back from success. So it's important to remember as we begin to talk about the but effect, a very short but poignant statement. Your progress ends where your but begins. Now, I want you to think about the interesting aha moment of that statement. Progress ends. Your progress, your ability to move forward ends where your but begins. Let me give you an example. How often have you and I said something like this: I'd really like to do that, but, and then we make an excuse. Or maybe it's, I always wanted to become a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, an astronaut. Pick whatever it is that you wanted to become. And then immediately after that comes, I always wanted to be a astronaut, but I always wanted to be a doctor, but I always wanted to be an accountant, but making an excuse. Or maybe it's this one. I would have helped, but I would have gone on to do this, but I'm trying to, but I know I should, but how many times have we allowed the but effect to take over our lives? But in every one of those examples I just shared, what follows our but is nothing more than an excuse. And in reality, if we take the time to examine that three-letter word, that but, it's an anchor, it's a weight, it's a ball and chain, it's a self-imposed roadblock that you and I attach to ourselves, we put in our own way that ultimately impedes our forward progress. A but that we use in a sentence is an attempt to rationalize, to justify, or to explain away our unwillingness to say, to do, to become, or to accomplish something more. At the end of the day, it's an attempt to excuse our inaction in some way. Now, the but effect is an attempt to shift the focus off of us, off of our action or inaction to some external force or to somebody else. It's a failure on our part when we let the but effect jump into our lives. It's a failure to be accountable to ourselves. It's a failure to be accountable to the people who are counting on us. At the end of the day, a but is nothing more than an attempt to minimize our own personal responsibility. So, avoiding responsibility for our actions, even if it's unintended, what does it do? It hinders our personal growth. It restricts our ability to learn. And when we're not learning, guess what? We are stagnating. When we allow the but effect to take over our lives and we avoid responsibility to ourselves and to others, it erodes people's trust in us. And it can ultimately create resentment that if they can't trust us, why would they ask us for our help? Now, the but effect can also make an explanation to try to justify why we did or didn't do something sound ungenuine. It can also make apologies we try to make sound insincere. So not only does progress end where your but begins, opportunity ends where your but begins. So think about that. Not only does your progress end, the opportunity to expand, to grow, to become better, to experience more success, all of that ends where your but begins. And I've already said, I'll say it again, the but effect stifles our potential. It restricts our growth. It impedes our ability. But here's what else it does. It diminishes our confidence, our belief in ourselves, and ultimately undermines our opportunity to rise to our full potential. The but effect simply shifts our thinking from I can and I will to I can't, so I won't. At the end of the day, it limits our progress. It halts our success. It leaves us where we are, as we are, unchanged. Going back to our childhood, when we as children fell on our butt, it halted our progress. We were trying to learn to stand or to climb. And when we fell and we landed on our butts, we stopped moving. Now, it was in that moment in our infancy, you and I faced a choice. And it's the same choice that you and I face even today. When we slipped and when we fell, we're trying to climb, we're trying to walk, we're trying to run, and all of a sudden we find ourselves on our butt. Here's the choice. We can either choose to stay on our butt or we can choose to get off our butt and start moving again. Well, as children, guess what we did? We didn't stay on our butts. We got off our butt and we went back to learning to do what we were trying to learn to do, to stand, to climb, to walk, to run, to do all the things now again that we take for granted. But in choosing to get off our butt and get moving again, now we put ourselves in a position to learn, to grow, to improve, and to become a better version of who we are and what we did. So why is it at adults, when the but effect shows up in our lives, we're essentially doing the same thing, facing the same choice? At times in life, we're going to stumble, we're going to fall, and we're going to find ourselves for a moment not moving forward. And when that happens, in that moment, we're not learning, growing, we're not exploring, we're not creating, we're not inventing, we're not thinking, we're not expanding or enlarging. When we end up on our butt, we're not taking action. We're no longer progressing and moving forward. When we end up on our butt, we're essentially putting a roadblock in our own way, and we've stopped any opportunity for us to move forward. Ultimately, we've halted our opportunity to experience more success in our lives. So now, as adults, we face the very same choice that we faced in our childhood. Two simple options. When the butt effect shows up and it influences our life and we find ourselves on our butt, we can choose to stay on our butt and remain where we are, or we can choose to get off our butt and start moving forward once again. Remember, we have a choice. You and I, we always have a choice. But every single choice that we face has a consequence. And whether we choose to act or not to act, both of those have a corresponding consequence that we're going to experience in our lives. I remind my kids often from the time they were little, even up today as grown adults, life is a series of choices and consequence. Every day we choose our choices, and the consequences of our life happen as a result of the choices that you and I have made. So if we don't like the consequences of life we're experiencing, what have we got to do? We've got to change our choices. But here's what I'm here to say, and it's not just me, my kids, and my family, it's all of us. Sadly, often we don't make the right choice. Sometimes when the butt effect shows up in our life, we choose to stay on our butt. We procrastinate. We just choose to not move forward. And when we do that, what happens? We stifle our progress and we ultimately sabotage our own success. Did you hear what I said? When we choose to stay on our butt, we choose to embrace and hold on to that excuse, we stifle our progress and we self-sabotage our success. Now, I don't know about you, but I want to experience more success in my life. And the only way I can do that is to overcome the butt effect. So, how do we do that? Well, let me give you three, maybe four things that we can do to deal with and overcome the butt effect in our lives. First, we've got to spot the butt. We've got to learn to develop an awareness of the limiting words that you and I may be saying to ourselves and our other people. How often do we make an excuse by saying, I'd love to do this, but I would love to become that, but I'd love to help you, but, and all of a sudden that but shows up in our lives and we're not even aware that we're limiting our success. Now, why does that happen? Because it's very, very easy for you and I to get comfortable with the butt effect. You got to remember, it's easier to make an excuse and not take action than it is to get into that uncomfortable, unfamiliar place where we've got to do something we've never done before, or we've got to be inconvenienced in some way. And we often forget it's in the uncomfortable, it's in the unfamiliar where learning and growth happen. And once you and I start excusing our inactions to try to justify or rationalize why we're not moving forward, and we choose instead to sit on our butt, it gets easier to do it the next time. And before you know it, life has passed us by. Opportunity has passed us by. Why? Because we're sitting on our butt. So we need to pay close attention to the narrative, the conversation, the story we're having with ourselves, the narrative, the conversation, the story we're speaking to others. And we need to actively listen for those buts that keep showing up. Now, one way that you and I can become more aware of the butt effect and its limitations in our lives is to learn to recognize the difference between a valid concern and making an excuse. As you and I begin to actively listen to the thoughts we're thinking, and we do that by being present in the moment and practicing mindfulness, paying attention to the conversation taking place between our ears, and we're actively listening to the words we're saying to ourselves and to other people, we can begin to train our brain to be alert for and to identify when those personal butt triggers and patterns start to show up in our lives. We can also ask those who are close to us, those in our inner circle who believe in us, that want to see us become the very best version of ourselves we can. We can ask those individuals to be but people that listen for the but and speak into our lives and say, hey, John, you just made an excuse. Do you realize you did that? We can lean into those people who are close to us and we can ask them to help us become aware of the common but phrases that we're using often unconsciously that are throttling back our momentum or ultimately holding us down as an anchor or a weight. Now, not only do we have to spot the but, secondly, we've got to learn to shrink the but. We've got to learn to reduce the power of limiting beliefs. Now that you and I have learned to recognize the but effect by being willing and learning how to spot it, guess what? We've now got to start to challenge the validity of the but statements we're making to ourselves and to other people. Now, all too often, as we size up the obstacles and challenges that we're going to face in life, it's very easy to see those obstacles and catastrophes in life as really catastrophic. We see obstacles, we see challenges as insurmountable, and all of a sudden, our mind goes to the worst case scenario. Maybe on the other hand, as we're beginning to size up those obstacles, we're beginning to evaluate the challenges that you and I are going to face every single day, maybe rather than seeing it as a catastrophe, we pause for a moment and take a more realistic view and maybe realize that obstacle or that challenge isn't as big as we initially thought. You know, not every situation in life is a chicken little, the sky is falling moment. But how often do we want to make every obstacle, every challenge, every adverse situation a chicken little moment, and we run around like a chicken with our head cut off, screaming, the sky is falling, the sky is falling. You know, when we think about it from a human behavior perspective, it's very easy when we're stressed or we're anxious or we're overwhelmed. It's incredibly easy to see any and every obstacle before us as immovable, insurmountable, something we can't overcome. That is seeing the world through the emotion of catastrophe. But in order for us to shrink the buts in our lives, we need to pause and we need to evaluate each and every obstacle that you and I are going to face throughout life. Because understand, life is a series of opportunities disguised as challenges and obstacles that give us the privilege and the opportunity to learn and to grow. So we need to evaluate each obstacle. And we need to begin to look for evidence that either supports that this is something big or it refutes that initial belief that this is something we can't overcome. Now, one of the ways we can do that is to break down the big butts in our lives into smaller, manageable chunks. Take the big butt and break it into smaller butts, and let's see if we can diffuse or refute those butts. You know, we look for opportunity hidden in the obstacle, and we look for ways to capitalize on it. That's how we overcome the but. That's how we shrink the but. As we see this big challenge, this big obstacle, this massive situation that we don't know that we can get over, get under, get around, go through, we've got to stop, we've got to pause, and we've got to look for the opportunity that's hidden in the obstacle. Because opportunity shows up disguised as obstacles, challenges, situations every single day. And when we see the opportunity and we lean in and look at how do I capitalize on that opportunity, all of a sudden that giant obstacle begins to shrink. It begins to break into smaller components. And now we realize I can do this and this and this and this. And now we're through it. We're over it. We're under it. We're around it. And we're moving forward. It's a simple matter of changing perspective. I mean, think about it. Mount Everest, the tallest place on earth, over 29,000 feet in elevation. Mount Everest looks intimidating from base camp. But when you're flying over Mount Everest at 40,000 feet, that mountain looks a lot smaller. That's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about shrinking the butt. Now, we've got to spot the butt. We've got to shrink the butt. The third thing we've got to do is swap the butt. We've got to replace negative, limited thinking and negative, limiting words with positive, limitless thinking and positive, limitless words. So we start by swapping butts to ands and finding a way to follow through. You know, it's easy to sell ourselves short. It's easy to avoid what's unfamiliar and uncomfortable. But when we swap our but for an and, we move from making an excuse to doubling down on what we intend to do. I've always wanted to do this, and I'm not only going to do it, I'm going to do it this way. Now, we can also swap our but to a how, and we can shift from making an excuse to solving and seeking solutions. We can stop saying what we can't do or what we won't do, and we can start proclaiming to the world, this is what we can do, and this is what we will do. I always wanted to be an attorney, and this is how I'm going to do it. That's where we have an opportunity to change. We can also swap our but to a so, and we shift from procrastination to making progress. We stop seeking perfection and using that as an excuse not to move forward, and instead we focus on the relentless pursuit of excellence. I've always wanted to learn to ride a bicycle. So I'm going to get a bicycle with training wheels, and I'm going to begin that journey today. We can also swap our but to a yet, acknowledging we've not yet, there it is, not yet taken action, but we're going to do so starting right now. Lastly, and the fourth thing I want to challenge you on is we want to learn to spot, to shrink, and to swap the but, and we make it stick through repetition. Now, one way that you and I become aware of our thoughts and the behaviors that aren't serving us well is by paying attention to what we're thinking and what we're doing. And when we become aware of thoughts and behaviors that aren't serving us well, now you and I can replace those thoughts and those behaviors with thoughts and behaviors that serve us better. So as we continue to spot, to shrink, and to swap the but effect for the and, the how, the so, and the yet effect, what are we doing? Every time we do that, we're building new neural pathways. We're reinforcing those neural pathways so that we are replacing habits that aren't serving us well with habits that do. And as we replace the but effect with the and, how, so, and yet effect, we're solidifying new habits that are going to allow us to rise to our full potential and experience more real life success. So let me give you a few things that I want you to do, 4 things to begin to implement this spot, shrink, and swap of the but effect. And I want to give you 4 tips as we wrap up today's training. Number 1, I want you to conduct a 24-hour butt audit. Now, I don't mean going around and looking at your butt every day, but I do. For 1 full day, I want you to simply pay attention to your thoughts, to your words. And I want you to notice and write down in a journal every time we say or think, but, and do it without trying to change it. Just become aware of the buts in your life and where they're showing up. When you go through this exercise, a 24-hour butt audit, I want to challenge you to do that starting today or tomorrow. Go through a 24-hour butt audit, because when you do it, it's going to build awareness. You're going to bring to your conscious awareness what you're doing with your butt. And when you do that, guess what's happening? Now you can spot the butt effect and realize when it's happening, what's causing it to happen, and more importantly, you and I begin to learn to recognize our own limiting language so we can arrest it, we can correct it, and we can change it. Now, the second exercise I want you to do is to shrink the butt effect. So having gone through this 24-hour butt audit, I want you to think about creating some reality check questions. And I want to give you a couple that you can start with. So now, having gone through a 24-hour process, starting in day 2, every time you recognize a butt showing up in your life and you've spotted that butt and you see the butt effect is there, I want you to utilize a reality check question to determine whether or not we're allowing our emotions to make things bigger than they should be. And let's bring it down and recognize how we can shrink the butt. So when you catch yourself in a butt effect moment, ask a question like this. Is this obstacle, is this challenge, is this situation as big as I'm making it in my thoughts? Is this obstacle as big as I'm making it? Another question you may want to ask yourself in this reality check moment is this. What would someone just like me, who's already succeeded despite facing this same obstacle or challenge, what would they do or what have they done? What would someone who's already succeeded despite facing this same challenge do? Another question you may want to ask would be this: what's the smallest step I can take right now? What's the smallest step I can take right now? Because remember, the butt effect wants you to end up sitting on your butt and staying there. That's a great question to ask. What is the smallest step I can take right now? Is this obstacle, is this challenge as big as I'm making it? And if somebody else has already succeeded facing the same challenge, what did they do that I can also do to get over, to get under, or to get around this challenge and keep moving forward? It's important to remember this. Reality questions like this are going to help you diminish the perceived power of the butt and to see it for the small inconvenience most of the time it is. Now, the third exercise I want to give you is part of the swap effect. I want you to begin to use a language flip drill to flip the but to an and, to a how, to a so, or to a what. So how do we do that? I want you to practice in thinking about your top 5 but statements. You're going to recognize that by the exercise you did in day 1, that 24-hour but audit. And I want you to look at and identify your top 5 but statements. But this time, I want you to rephrase that. And I want you to use a different word. And let me give you some example. Maybe it was, I'd love to exercise more, but I don't have time. Well, let's replace that but with something else. I'd love to exercise more, and I'm going to find creative ways to fit that into my schedule. Or maybe it's, how can I exercise more given my busy schedule? I want you to reframe the but that holds you back into an and, how, so, or yet that lets you see a way and an opportunity to move forward, even if it's just one small step. So I've given you 3 so far: how to spot it, how to shrink it, how to swap it. Now, how do we reinforce it and make sure it works? Fourth thing I want you to do is to create a buddy system. Find a partner who's willing to go with you on this journey to overcome the butt effect in their lives, just as you're seeking to do the same. And I want you to partner with them. I want you to hold each other mutually accountable to catch the butts in each other's conversation. So when you hear your partner say but, you're going to gently spot it. You're going to gently help them work through how to shrink it and swap it. And they're going to do the same thing. When your partner hears you say but, they're going to help you spot it. They're going to help you work on a process to shrink it and to swap it. And when you do that as a team together, you're going to get more done. And working in a buddy system, you're going to create mutual accountability. And at the same time, you're going to make this a collaborative process rather than a process that you're being critical of yourself. Now, I want you to remember this as I get ready to wrap up for today. A but separates thoughts or ideas. A but is a limiter. It's a restrictor. It's a withholder. It's a stifler. It's an excuse maker. It's a compromiser. It's an eliminator. But is a self-imposed roadblock that you and I put in our own way that restricts our progress and it limits our success. But a but, hear me now, a but can also transition to a new thought or a new idea, especially when that thought or that idea modifies the previous one. Let me give you a couple examples of that. I've been making excuses for far too long, but today's the day that changes. I'm going to do X or Y or Z starting today. Or maybe it's like this. Maybe I've been telling myself I can't do this for most of my life, but today that changes from I can't to I can. Now, don't forget this as we wrap up. When the but effect shows up, and from time to time, it's going to, we always have 2 choices. We always have a choice. We can choose to stay on our butt and remain where we are, or we can choose to get off our butt and get moving once again. Here's what I can tell you. Black belt leaders are going to choose the latter, not the former. They're not going to stay on their butt. They're going to get off their butt. They're going to clean themselves off, get back in the ring, get back in the fight, get back on the trail, and start moving forward. They're going to take the next step, even if it's a small one, to keep moving towards their potential so they can experience more success. My question to you is this: if given the choice between staying on your butt or getting off your butt, what are you going to choose? I'm Dr. John Terry, the Black Belt Leader. Thanks for joining me. Have a great day.